Hi, and welcome back. We're on to section 2.3, where I introduce OpenCV and I talk about OpenVINO, which is brand spanking new. It's part of OpenCV 4, the beta release. And I also talk about their limitations because even though OpenCV is very, very useful, you don't actually need to know any OpenCV to do deep learning and computer vision. I use it quite a bit still because I am very familiar with a lot of the algorithms, so I tend to use it when there are other libraries that can be doing the same thing. So what I'm saying is that you don't have to know OpenCV, but it's one of the better image processing libraries out there. And you will always need an image processing library when doing deep learning. At least not all the time, but most times. So let's get into it. Okay, so let's talk about OpenCV. Now, OpenCV was officially launched in 1999. It stands for Open Source Computer Vision, and it was an Intel initiative, which I actually forgot, but I just remembered because I have it in the slide. And what OpenCV is, basically, imagine you have research being done on computer vision worldwide by university professors all over the world. And each of them are coming up with their own algorithms and their own stuff to do image processing stuff. So basically, OpenCV was everyone basically combining their stuff into one library, one easy-to-use library, to make it accessible for everyone else. So you developed a function that does this here, all the way in New Zealand. I want to now use that in my software. So now OpenCV was a library that basically brought everything together. OpenCV's core is written in C++, which means it's lightning fast. In Python, we're simply using a wrapper that basically wraps over and calls C++ code inside of Python. It is quite quick too. However, using it in C++ is always faster because there is always some overhead when doing this kind of stuff in Python. It's not bad. It's actually, I've done some very high performance stuff using Python's OpenCV. So I don't think it's that much of a performance sacrifice. Maybe at least for some things it might be. Let's go back to it. So the first major release was in 2006, officially. Even though it was launched in 1999, I'm guessing it took from 7 years to actually compile and make sure everything was working, well documented and stuff. Second release was in 2009, which is probably OpenCV 2. And the third was in 2015, OpenCV 3. And the fourth, which is in this year, well, this current year, when I'm actually making this course, and pretty soon in a month or two, it's going to be 2019. But that still means that OpenCV 4, which is still in beta, is quite new and actually has quite a lot of cool features. It has over 2,500 optimized algorithms, and that's quite a bit. I've probably used hundreds, now that I think about it, but 2,500 is insane. It's quite a bit. And it is extremely, extremely useful for computer vision applications, as I mentioned quite a few times. It's available in Windows, Linux, macOS, Android, iOS. All of these things have bindings to Python, Java, MATLAB. I think there are a couple other languages, but maybe not officially supported by OpenCV. Now, this is how OpenCV's website looks. Kind of looks a bit dated, but it's still very up to date. It talks about the new release here with OpenVINO toolkit, the alpha release, which actually just came out last month. And talks about different conferences, news and stuff. Check it out. I actually go to the site quite often just to keep up to date. It's opencv.org. And this is the new release. Intel actually distributed this release a few months ago. It's called OpenVINO. And what OpenVINO is, it's basically a way to use your CPU and Intel's iGPU to actually use the OpenCV framework to do deep learning. Because as you will see in this course, deep learning on a CPU, while very possible, is quite slow. And I think Intel, because they have such a monopoly on the CPU market, no offense to AMD, I love AMD, but they're not nearly as big as Intel. Intel had to push to actually do this for their CPUs. So now their CPUs are a lot faster in training deep learning networks. And I should mention, it's not just for deep learning. A lot of other algorithms in OpenCV have been sped up now. Now, there are some disadvantages of OpenVINO. Firstly, while it's quite useful, it is a bit late to market. TensorFlow and other algorithms such as Caffe and Theano, PyTorch, those have been around for 3 to 4 years by now. And they're established, they're well documented, all the bugs and kinks have been worked out. I'm using TensorFlow and Keras. Keras is basically, I'll get into this later on in the course, but Keras is a API that actually calls TensorFlow code. It's quite easy to use, which you'll find out in this course. But what that means though is that OpenVINO is very late to market, and it isn't super useful, mainly because a lot of professionals and researchers still will always use GPUs or even TPUs, which are tensor processing units, mainly because those are super powerful and super fast. No one is going to get ImageNet, which consists of millions of images and takes like weeks to train on GPUs. No one is going to train that on a CPU, ever, period. So OpenVINO basically doesn't have that much usefulness in the computer vision deep learning domain. It may have it for basically people like us who don't have access to powerful GPUs or expensive cloud GPUs. So it could be useful for us. We'll stay tuned. We'll monitor it for the next few months. So far, adoption has been quite slow. I've actually struggled to find example code and tutorials of OpenVINO, and it's still in beta. That could be why as well. So that concludes this chapter, chapter 2, which was basically a basic introduction to computer vision, what are images, and a bit about OpenCV. Okay, so now that we're finished with chapter 2, you're now about ready to set up your complete deep learning environment, and I've made it super easy for you. So go on to chapter 3 and let's get going.